Right, well, hello everyone, I'm Susanne. I'm a compulsive eater. I'm abstinent today because I choose my meals off the grey sheet. I write them down, I commit them to my sponsor, and I eat them. And I eat nothing else, no matter what. And I make that my number one priority. First off, apologies to those of you who've recently heard me, because it was my anniversary yesterday, so I have been speaking a few times. But because this is called the Sunlight of the Spirit, this particular meeting, I do want to get into a bit of the spirituality aspect of things. But first, of course, I want to tell you where I've come from, so you know I am definitely one of us here. I think I qualify. I've always had kind of, more greed than others. I want to call it greed because I always wanted more of everything, but especially food, because that was accessible. And my parents never restricted my food either. They bought what I wanted and I got what I wanted. And, it suffice to say that when I was 16, I had gallstones. So that tells you the kind of diet I was eating, because I never ate anything that was healthy, remotely healthy. And the amounts I was eating just meant I was, on the fat side. I wasn't huge, but I was definitely, a plump child. And when I started dieting in my late teens, I discovered that I could, and I did diet. And I held the same diet, which in my late teens up to my sort of 21st odd birthday, I kept the same diet completely and rigorously. There was never a binge. There was never a deviation from it. It was an incredibly strict diet that just prohibited all animal foods and all fats. So basically, I ate like a rabbit. And then I was invited to a birthday party, and I know it was my 21st birthday at university with some friends, and they said they'd take me out for dinner. And I decided, okay, well, on that day, I'll just eat whatever there is, and I'll be fine. And then I'll go back to what to me was normal, that diet. However, there was no going back. This was, for me, this watershed moment, this kind of where the dam broke, where for years I had held to this diet, and suddenly there just was no way I could do it, not even for a day, not even for a day. I could not get to bed at the end of the day having done it, not a single time. And within a couple of months, I had gained 50 pounds. And of course, people saw, of course, people noticed, of course, I was ashamed and wasn't telling anybody what was going on. I was binging. I was living in halls at university at the time, so I was on my own. Nobody could see. I was carrying my binge foods into there every single day from the shop, because I could not go to the shop. There was just this complete despair. And my solution to it was to move, to get away. So I moved countries, and I discovered that, funny enough, the problem went with me. And then, so I tried again. So I had moved, I was at university in England, so I moved to Austria to get away from it. 6 months later, I moved to America, thought, maybe further away. But funny enough, it still didn't work. And a few months into living in America, I was in New York City. I don't remember exactly what I Googled, but I must have Googled something like overeating help, something like that. I was in a desperate place. And I found GreySheet. Now, I've never been to OA or to any other fellowship. I just found, thank God for that, GreySheet. Found the fellowship. This was live, of course, because I was living in New York. So I went to meetings, got a sponsor, got the GreySheet, started. And 2 weeks later, I decided, May, that was way too hard. That is overkill for my problem. And stuck the GreySheet into a book as a kind of souvenir to remember as I grow older, and forgot about it. Did another geographical. I'm slow to learn, so I moved to Maryland next. And again, my issues came along. And it was about a year later that I remembered the GreySheet, found it in the same book, and looked it up online, and just started and just got abstinent. I got a sponsor. I was on phone meetings every day. This is in the sort of early 2000s. So I had the GreyNet, where I would post every day, and I had the phone bridge. I was an outpost in Maryland, but I did have a sponsor, and I worked the program. And I got abstinent and I stayed abstinent. And for a few years, I had to eventually leave America because my visa ran out. So this wasn't a geographical to try and get away. It was more a case of, well, you know, I've got to find somewhere that I'm allowed to go. So I went to England again, abstinent this time. I moved into a house share with 4 other girls in their 20s. And I remember arriving there. They had never met me before, but I had arranged all this kind of, previously I had arranged it online. So they had never met me before. I came off an airplane, walked into that house, and they were all like, hi, how are you? Nice to meet you. And I said, well, I need a shelf in the fridge, please. So at the time that I had my commitment with me and I was abstinent. And then living in England, I was in Winchester, which is about, probably 45 minutes outside of London, where the only meeting was, the only live meeting. And at the time, it was also very difficult to get onto American phone meetings because you had to buy these cards where you had to scratch numbers off, and then you had to, in order to call that, you had to get 25 numbers exactly right, and then a pin, and then the number of the phone bridge, and it was just all too much. Again, I was kind of like in New York. I just came to a point where I decided, well, this is just too much. I can do this on my own. So I didn't decide to stop doing GreySheet. I just decided I was okay to do it on my own. And because of probably a few years of abstinence behind me, I was okay for a little while, but I stopped hearing other people's stories. I stopped hearing my own story. I was surrounded by normal eaters. And eventually it just got to the point, and of course they asked me constantly, why do you have to do this? It just got to the point where I felt like, well, everybody else manages. Why shouldn't I? Why can't I? So again, I made a conscious decision to stop. So I've never been accidentally not abstinent. It's always been a choice, but the choice in that, it had built, it wasn't sudden, it wasn't accidental. It had built. I had removed myself from the fellowship, and eventually it just didn't seem like a priority anymore. And my disease is cunning in a lot of ways, because had I put my GreySheet away and gone headfirst into a binge, of course I would have run right back. But that isn't what happened. So I'm talking now, I'm in my sort of end 20s probably, just around when I turned 30, I put the GreySheet down. And for a time, it seemed all right. It seemed okay. I was still avoiding things that set us off, but it was an incremental descent and decline that was, to me, so slow to, it wasn't actually slow, but like to me and to my mind, I was able to keep my denial going for very long, because I'm very good at that. So for such a long time, I could tell myself, well, this is still all right. There's people who do this. This is all within the range of normal. And if anyone's heard this, frogs, apparently, if you try to boil them, you put them in cold water, they don't jump out. And then as you heat up the water, it heats up, and they won't jump out. They'll just die. And I was that frog, I was that frog in the water. It was heating up, and I never jumped out. And in the end, I'm talking, it took me 10 years. So I put the GreySheet down in about when I turned 30. And then when I turned 40, I was at a desperate place. I was absolutely at a desperate place. For the 5 years leading up to that, I had been doing what's called intermittent fasting. So I was eating 1 meal a day, sometimes 2. But most of the time I was just hungry and very unhappy. At the beginning, I had lost some weight with that, but I couldn't go back to eating 3 meals a day because I would gain the weight again. And then at the end, 10 years after leaving GreySheet, I was on 1 meal a day and I was gaining weight. I was watching the scale go up, and I felt utterly powerless, because what else can I do? I can't not eat. And I couldn't, once I started eating, in any way take any kind of control over what I was eating. Thank you, Laura. So I felt just utterly hopeless, completely lost in this. And what happened was, and I had completely forgotten about GreySheet. That was just in the very recesses of my mind, I guess. And I woke up one morning having dreamt that I put my food on the scale and was abstinent. So my subconscious hadn't forgotten, even though my mind had. And I woke up and I looked it up, I made the call, I got on, and it was a bit like those kind of escalators in the airports. Like I stepped onto there and it just moved. I got a temp sponsor and then I got a full-on sponsor, and like everything just kind of fell into place. And in a way, it felt a bit like, if you have a pair of like really old comfortable shoes that you put on and you just relax. And that's kind of what it felt like to me when I got GreySheet Abstinent again. It was just like, I'm in there, phew, I know what this is working. I get to eat breakfast, oh my goodness, like after years and years of not. That was one of my highlights. I'm still 2 years in, I'm still so grateful for breakfast. I love it. So yeah, so that is the overview of my story, and I've got under 5 minutes, but I wanted to go into what spirituality is a little bit, because this is a Sunlight of the Spirit meeting. And spirituality for me, for those 10 years I was out, I believed in God. I asked him every day to take this away from me. I asked him to change me. I asked him to change my circumstances. I asked him to, I don't know, just give me the strength, whatever. And he did not. And that was a really hard place to be, because, who do I blame? Do I blame me? Do I blame God? Why is he not helping me? If he can, why won't he? And that was eating away at any faith I had, really. And when I got abstinent, what I learned with is that spirituality has, to me, to do with peace. It's not necessarily about whether somebody believes in God or not. I know some people who don't and are still very spiritual people because there is peace. And to me, that kind of resting, that peacefulness in what is, in the circumstances that are, in who I am, in what I get, just peace, just resting and trust. That to me is spirituality. And when I got abstinent, that was there. That was instantly there, because I wasn't fighting anymore. And in all my dieting, it was always like, I want to be thin tomorrow, right? So I'm going to do this as harshly as I can and just subject my body to this because I have an end point to get to. Whereas when I got abstinent, I was just like, the scale on which the standing on scale is a kind of byproduct. I know it's going to get me there. I've been on GreySheet before. I know where this goes, but I've resigned from the kind of, I'm in charge of this, and what can I eat, what can't I eat? The noise in my head is gone, and the peace that opens up, that to me is spiritual. And I access it by putting my food on a scale. 3 times a day I stand there and I put my food there, and that's how I buy my peace. And also I give it to my sponsor, and I've given my sponsor not only my food but also my weight, and she's in charge of that too. And I don't have to worry about what I can and can't eat off the GreySheet. If it's abstinent, I can eat it. That was another one of my mistakes in my old abstinence, where I was still feeling myself in charge of my weight and wanting to lose more weight. Thank you, Laura. I would restrict what off the GreySheet I could have. And I have, since I've come back, I have just refused to do that. It isn't up to me. Everything on the GreySheet is up for grabs. I can have all of it. There is a rich variety, and I will not take restriction. And that is a free place. It's a peaceful place, and it's a place I'm really grateful to be. Thanks for letting me share.